Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever had a relationship where you understood each other perfectly, yet somehow you constantly managed to miscommunicate? It's a frustrating feeling, right? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into a massive 2018 cultural phenomenon that captures exactly that vibe. Sally Rooney's landmark novel, Normal People. This is a story that completely leans away from your typical cliché romantic tropes, and instead it dives headfirst into some really profound psychological realism. We're going to be exploring the intensely emotional lives of young adults trying to navigate intimacy, identity, and the incredibly messy modern social context.
So you might be wondering, why does a seemingly simple story about two teenagers falling in and out of love feel so completely devastating to read? At its core, we're looking at Connell Waldron and Marianne Sheridan, two teens from County Sligo, Ireland. They basically spend their high school and university years constantly orbiting each other, falling in and out of love. And the reason their dynamic hits so incredibly hard is because their bond is genuinely extraordinary, yet it's constantly getting derailed by the most ordinary, relatable human insecurities. Real life, heavy social expectations, and personal trauma just keep getting in their way. It bends their connection to the absolute limit, but somehow, it never fully breaks it.
To really get what's happening here, we've kind of got to look at this story as a 21st century novel of manners. Think about how Jane Austen's books exposed all the unspoken societal rules of 19th century British society. Well, Sally Rooney is basically doing the exact same thing, but for modern millennial youth. A novel of manners is all about hyper-focused observation of customs and values. Rooney uses this classic framework to show us exactly how this generation handles emotional intimacy, physical connection, and just the absolutely crushing pressures of early adulthood in a post-recessionary world. All right, so that brings us to part one, power, class, and gender. And this brilliantly illustrates how the characters' external environments literally dictate their internal feelings of self-worth. There's this dramatic role reversal that happens. Back in their small-town secondary school, Connell is the guy. He's popular, he's well-liked, he's the star athlete. Marianne, she's considered this intimidating social outcast with zero friends. But when they both move to Trinity College in Dublin, the entire social hierarchy flips completely upside down. Marianne seamlessly glides right into this wealthy, elitist university crowd while Connell suddenly finds himself struggling. He feels entirely out of place and totally isolated. You see, socioeconomic class acts like this invisible wedge that's constantly shifting the power dynamic and driving them apart. Connell's mother, Lorraine, actually works as a house cleaner in Marianne's family's massive white mansion. And this massive wealth disparity causes Connell to feel completely trapped. He's so terrified of how he'll be perceived that he initially keeps their high school romance a total secret. He's literally afraid his friends will find out his mom cleans her house. Later on at Trinity College, his lower socioeconomic status makes him a total target for snobbery. His wealthy peers mock his fashion sense, they mock his thick Galway accent, and they literally call him a milk-drinking colchie. It just fuels all of his insecurities. Moving right along to part two, the tragedy of silence. So the crucial point is this. Miscommunication is really the central theme of Normal People. We see it so clearly here. In one of the absolute most heartbreaking moments of the entire story, Connell can't afford his rent in Dublin over the summer, but he's too embarrassed to just ask Marianne if he can move in with her. So instead, he vaguely asks if she wants to see other people while he goes back home. Naturally, she interprets this as him breaking up with her. It's wild. These devastatingly simple miscommunications alter the entire trajectory of their lives. What they assume is perfectly obvious to the other person simply is not. And, this dynamic isn't just about young awkwardness. It's heavily rooted in deep societal structures. If we look at academic research into gender norms, it really points out how society conditions men to believe they shouldn't be vulnerable. Trapped by this kind of hegemonic masculinity, Connell is frequently totally unable to communicate his emotional needs. He can't say what he's actually feeling, and it leads him into this really intense psychological isolation. Then you have Marianne, right? She faces a totally different psychological toll. She comes from extreme generational wealth, but her home life is a literal nightmare. Her father was incredibly violent before he died, and her mother and brother are actively emotionally and physically abusive. They're constantly conditioning her to believe that she isn't special. Because of this profound trauma and deep social alienation, Marianne considers herself to be intrinsically damaged. She thinks she's just bad and completely unlovable. She fundamentally believes, at her core, that she is incapable of being a normal person.
Sally Rooney captures these massive internal battlegrounds just beautifully through her minimalist, austere prose. Just listen to this. They couldn't look at each other. They had to look into corners of the room or at their feet. It perfectly encapsulates the awkward, intense privacy of their connection. Rooney gives us a front-row seat to their inner monologues, highlighting the painful disconnect between what they're thinking and what they're actually doing. They understand each other better than literally anyone else in the world, yet they exist in this fragile space where they can barely even meet each other's eyes.
Which brings us to part 3, visualizing the unsaid. Now, what's really interesting about this is how directors Lenny Abramson and Teddy McDonald tackled the massive challenge of adapting a book where almost all the major action happens internally in the characters' heads. They completely rejected using a traditional voiceover narrator for the TV show. Instead, they relied on just phenomenal acting by Paul Mescal and Daisy Edgar Jones, paired with some absolutely ingenious camera work. They used this very shallow depth of focus to literally blur out and exclude the outside world whenever the couple is together. They'd often shoot the characters from behind to force us, the audience, to literally walk in their shoes. And during conversations, they leaned heavily on a shot-reverse shot technique. This really amplifies the intense back-and-forth intimacy of their dynamic. You feel the visceral chemistry and the isolation right along with them.
All right, on to our final section, part 4, becoming normal people.
Unlike a typical coming-of-age story that focuses on one single egocentric protagonist, Normal People operates on what's called a dual hero arc. Their personal development is entirely contingent on their relationship with one another. They literally constantly save each other. When Connell falls into severe depression and anxiety following the tragic suicide of a high school friend, it's Marianne who anchors him and supports him through it. And later, when Marianne's abusive brother violently turns on her, it's Connell who drops everything to rescue her and pull her to safety. It turns out that their early codependence actually serves as the true catalyst for their individual survival and eventual growth.
This mutual growth really culminates in a finale that plays out slightly differently depending on the medium you're consuming. In the novel, the ending is famously, almost painfully abrupt. Connell gets this great offer for an MFA writing program in New York, and Marianne simply tells him to go, effectively ending the book right there. But the TV series extends this just a little bit. It gives us a slightly longer, incredibly fulfilling conversation where Marianne declines his invitation to join him in New York. She independently chooses to stay behind because, for the first time, she is finally enjoying her life in Dublin.
"You should go," she says. "I'll always be here. You know that." It's just a stunningly powerful line to end on. And here's the thing. This isn't a tragic breakup. Not at all. It is the ultimate triumph of two people who have finally reached a healthy, equal footing in life. They've learned to acknowledge their own individual worth. That means their relationship is no longer rooted in trauma or this desperate codependence we saw earlier, but rather in genuine, secure, and mature support. Through all the agonizing miscommunications, these stark class divides, and the heavy emotional baggage, Sally Rooney leaves us with this incredible, defining message. Real love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about learning to become someone capable of loving and being loved. It forces all of us to take a step back and ask ourselves, what does it actually mean to be a normal person? And honestly, is being normal really the goal we should be striving for anyway? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gave you a whole new perspective on this beautiful story. Catch you next time.